Brandt DXT grain carts have efficient unload speeds, large carrying capacities, unmatched durability, and reliable components that make sure your cart is working when you are. Lead the field with DXT grain carts from Brandt. Visit your local Brandt dealer for more information.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hello and welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Friday, August 1st. Yes, it is the start of a new crop year. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, filling in for Shaun Haney. But don't worry, you'll hear from Shaun later in today's show because he is going to join the issues panel. To kick off today's show, we will have Wasko with a beef market update. I've got some questions about, the reopening of Australia's market to Canadian and U.S. beef. And of course, we had some very key reports last week that came out on the beef side. So I have lots of questions for her. And of course, has it rained in Saskatchewan? That's kind of important when it comes to having grass to hold back those heifers and keep that cow herd strong. As I mentioned, Shaun Haney will be on the issues panel. Joining him, Kelvin Heppner. I will be hosting, but we also have Evan Shout joining us. So Evan, based out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, he's with Maverick Ag, and of course, co-host of the Truth About Ag podcast that you can hear right here on the Real Agriculture Network. If you've got any feedback from today's show, and we have a laundry list of things to get to, and I'm sure some of them might spark some debate out there on the landscape. So give us a call, 1-855-776-6147. You can drop us a line there, or you can email me, lsmith@realagriculture.com, or of course your regular host, Shaun Haney, at shaney@realagriculture.com. Let us know if you've got any feedback, ideas, or if you disagree with something we say. Let's take a quick break. I'll be back with the beef market update right after this.
Joining us right now is Mark Alberts. What do you do at BSF?
I'm on the Invigor Hybrid Canola marketing team based out of Calgary, Alberta, to really help bring the Invigor Hybrid lineup to market. The new hybrid, Invigor L355 PC, it's built for the mid to longer maturing growing zones, and it's going to have one of the strongest disease packages we've seen in the Invigor canola lineup so far, without sacrificing high yield potential and having all those things folks can rely on, like patented pod shatter reduction technology. We were talking a little bit about verticillium stripe and some of the other challenging diseases in Western Canada. Invigor L355 PC would have one of our top rankings in terms of verticillium stripe performance. Again, blackleg resistance, very strong standability and lodging resistance, and really going to be a winning hybrid in terms of the mid to long maturity zones for 2026. We don't want to have 100 of hybrids in the lineup, but having the right amount that can suit those different growing zone disease challenges in Western Canada is really important. And the hybrids really are built to be more suitable for that. So there's not just one that you can say is the best across Western Canada. We really have a lineup that's going to be suitable for all the different areas.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith, and joining me now, as always, for the beef market update, it's Wasko. How are you, Ann?
I am good, Lyndsey. Thank you.
It is very exciting to see you, and especially to see you with conditions being what they are. I hear it's great.
Mm-hmm. We in Southwest Saskatchewan have had some great moisture through not just a week or so, through the entire month of July. And even this morning here on August 1, it's still raining. Mm-hmm. So it's significantly changed and improved forage and crop conditions in this neck of the woods. I can't speak for everyone, but certainly here.
Yeah, there are definitely areas still struggling, but it's great to hear that some areas that, of course, have been struggling for moisture for, year over year, definitely seeing some. So on that high note, let's dig in to the cattle prices down south.
Yeah, how can you not talk about markets when markets just continue to surprise to the upside? You know, the things that I haven't been able to talk about for years. So in the South, so what we call Texas and Kansas markets this week, Kansas was up $3, 235. So that's up 3 from last week. In the North, still solid, 244 to 245 live, 383 to 385 delivered drafts. Both of those prices are pretty much steady to maybe a tad firmer than last week, but solid markets. It was interesting this week. We did see the live cattle futures market, after hitting all-time highs on Wednesday, see a pretty significant sell-off on Thursday, and had kind of markets certainly wondering what the next step is. But we've seen the futures market overbought for many weeks. So many will say this was an overdue correction, and arguably I think that's right. But cash kind of just ignored what the futures was doing and carried on in its own merry little way, like it has most of the year. So we are into August, which will be interesting. So for example, we've got the August live cattle contract. Last time I looked this morning, we're just under 230. And the cash, we'll see what the average is, but between north and south, it'll probably be over 240. So we've got a pretty wide spread, even though we're into August. So we'll see. It could be interesting this month, as those two numbers have to come much closer together. On the wholesale side, we saw the choice market close at 361.30 for the choice beef. That's down 675 from last week. Not a big surprise. These are what we call the dog days of summer, and to have some weakness in that wholesale market's not a surprise. The flex running about $20 back of the choice if people are watching that. Locally here in Alberta, we saw the fed cattle market mostly at 505 delivered dressed. That's going to be about $5 a hundred higher than last week. So that's a good move in terms of markets have been kind of steady here in Alberta, well back of the U.S. market. So that's going to help close that gap a wee bit. And in Ontario, I understand some bids at 527. If that materializes, Lyndsey, that would be $3 under last week. But Ontario's had a nice little catch up over the weeks leading up to this one. So good news, I think, really across the board. Mm-hmm. Now, yeah. Do you want to talk about the markets or the reports from last week? Or?
Yeah, because we touched on it just briefly on Real Agriculture, but of course didn't really have time to dig in. But we did get some reports last week that I think would be important to mention for sure.
Yeah, 2 USDA reports came out a week ago, and I know Shaun did talk a little bit about the on-feed report. So we had the on-feed report, the July 1 report, and the U.S. mid-year cattle inventory report. For those that watch closely, we didn't have a USDA report a year ago, for budget reasons. So some of the comparisons are to 2 years ago. And I just wanted to maybe just use some estimates for last year to give us a better idea where we sit. But first of all, on the on-feed report, I think the bottom line was the smaller placements, 8% smaller placements than last year. And largely due, or a big factor anyways, would have been that the Mexico-U.S. border is still closed to feeder cattle imports. So that's really impacting that feeder supply, especially into those southern U.S. feedlots. So ultimately, the on-feed numbers were down 2% from last year. Now, that inventory report, again, I think the bottom line, if you just want to read the Coles notes, just confirms that tight supply of feeders that's been driving this market all along. The beef cow number, for the record, was 28.65 million. It's smaller than 2 years ago, but if you look at some estimates from last year, you could argue it's up 1%. So maybe there's some signs. We'll see when the January report comes out, but maybe some signs that when the dust all settles, did the cow herd bottom on January 125, or is the bottom 26? They're probably not very different numbers, but we're probably getting close to that point. The replacement heifer is 3.7 million head. It's down from 2 years ago, but about the same as last year's estimate. Again, at the end of the day, we've got the smallest supply of cattle, feeder cattle outside of feedlots on record.
Right.
So that's where we sit for U.S. supply.
So that to me, and we actually got to meet in San Antonio back in February, and the size of the cow herd was a big discussion point. Absolutely. Is this then a new sort of level that we hold at? What do you think going forward we see as influx in the cow herd number?
Well, I do think if this is the bottom of the U.S. Cattle cycle, which, like I say, we're probably close to or at or have been at over the now or a year ago, or the first of this year. From here, I do think we're starting to see some early signs, some heifer retention. It's not going to be aggressive. It doesn't look like the cycle of 2014-15. I think we talked about that earlier this year. So it does look like we're going to start to see some expansion of the U.S. herd, albeit slow. And again, in areas that have received moisture, right? Again, they're looking at very similar situations to us where some states have been good, some states haven't. So I think you're going to see that show up. Do we get back to numbers we were at before? History says the cycles don't do that. The next cycle shows a lower high than the previous. And that's kind of, I guess that's where I am in terms of what to expect going forward. More numbers, yes, but the levels we've seen before, no.
No. And how then does, because you mentioned, of course, that the tight supply of feeder cattle made worse, of course, or by the U.S.-Mexico, the Mexico-U.S. movement. How does that impact Canada-U.S. movement? And that's setting aside all the trade issues. But just looking at the cattle industry, does that put, more favorable conditions for Canadian cattle moving south?
Well, we'll see. I guess we have to also talk about north, Lyndsey, because over the last, really since 2017, it seemed like recent, but now it's getting to be a while ago, cattle feeders, especially in Western Canada, have really relied on U.S. supply of feeder cattle imports into Canada. And that continues to be the case here in 2025. We continue to see imports of feeder cattle into Canada from the U.S. above last year. We're running 31% higher than last year. So that's become a normal part of our supply. So cattle feeders saw if the cow herd wasn't going to grow, we got to get them from somewhere else. That part hasn't changed. So again, it's a North American supply, which, when you shut off imports at the U.S.-Mexico border, big impacts there. And again, we're continuing to see that north-south flow. Right now, it's more cattle from the U.S. to Canada.
Mm-hmm. Now, so then shifting gears a little, looking towards the fall. It is August 1. We will start looking at some of those, some of the feeder prices into the fall. How is that looking right now? What are sales looking like?
Well, amazing. You're hearing stories out of the U.S. Markets on feeder cattle, and here it's been quiet through July on cash cattle, but record highs, even bottom line, both countries. It's been quiet on the auction market sales, but Shaun and I have talked about these internet sales since May, very active here in Western Canada, more than double the numbers moving through that because of these record prices. And it's a way to mitigate risk, obviously. And so been very active at record high prices. So we're turning the page into August at some pretty exciting levels in terms of prices.
It's about time. Now, yes. So a high note there, and certainly some added green grass, a high note as well. We did get news this week, and this is maybe not so much of a high note, except for maybe the feel-good feels. Australia reopening to cattle, chilled and frozen beef, and this, comes after the U.S. news as well. This is, yes, it's news. We haven't shipped beef into the Australian market since, BSE lately. A lot of this is a hangover from 2003. But does this really, is this a huge deal? Is this sort of a, hey, good news, but we're not going to see a lot of beef move?
Well, we'll see, Lyndsey. Times have changed a lot since 2003. Again, psychology, markets love the psychology of trade deals getting done, markets getting open. So that piece is positive. It'll be interesting to see as, trade changes around the world, potentially because of what's going on with some of the tariff deals. Does that become a market for high quality beef potentially? We'll see. But again, just the psychology of an open market and the diversification that we need for Canadian beef, bang on. I'm all in.
Yep, absolutely. All right. And for those of you in Australia who obviously listen to this program, you can now source Canadian beef right in your own backyard. There you go. All right. Ann Wasko, thanks so much for joining me here on the show.
Thanks, Lyndsey. Have a good day.
All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
The new Brandt XT grain cart delivers unmatched forward auger reach, side auger reach, and discharge spout clearance for easy positioning, with sight lines that allow you to actually see what you're doing. while you're doing it, saving you time with each load and getting you back to the combine sooner. They say hindsight is 20/20. We say seeing what's in front of you is better. Lead the field with the new XT grain cart from Brand.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to get your crop off to a great start and a strong finish. Whether you're growing chickpeas, faba beans, lentils, or peas, you'll get all the latest and best agronomic information at PulseSchool.com. A library of top-notch agronomy videos from industry experts available on demand at your fingertips. Visit the Pulse School, brought to you by BASF on RealAgriculture.com.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Friday, August 1st. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment brought to you by Genesis Fertilizers. With volatile markets and rising costs, now's your chance to be part of the solution. It's time to secure your future with Genesis Fertilizers. Gain control and ensure access to locally produced nitrogen. Act now to protect your farm's future for generations. Visit genesisfertilizers.com to learn more. All right, bringing in the issues panel on this Friday. We'll start in Altona, Manitoba. We've got Kelvin Heppner. Kelvin, how are you?
Doing well here, Lyndsey. The sun is shining. I guess it's a long weekend we're headed into, and the start of the new crop year, August 1st, at least for Western Canada, going back to the, is it a legacy of the wheat board? I'm not sure, but August 1st, happy new crop year.
Yeah, there you go. We'll all throw a party, maybe some fireworks. Also joining us, we've got Evan Shout, joining us from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Of course, co-host of the Truth About Ag podcast and with Maverick Ag. Evan, how are you?
I'm good. This is new for me. Usually it's Shaun barking orders at me. I get you today. This is brand new frontier here. So
I'm much nicer, actually.
I can tell already.
Yeah, exactly. And speak of the devil, Shaun Haney is here as a panelist today. How are you, Shaun?
I'm doing great. I have things to say. You
do. So apparently I get to host and I have to keep everything straight on this panel. I don't know if I can, but I'm going to try. So speaking of trying to keep things straight, we will start with whatever is happening between Canada and the U.S. I tried this morning to make sense of what is happening, trying to keep track. Kelvin, catch us up. As of recording anyway, because this seems to be how this goes, where are we at? Are we in fact facing a higher tariff as of this August 1 here on Canadian goods going into the U.S.?
Yes, on a portion of goods going to the U.S. from Canada, everything that is not compliant with the CUSMA USMCA deal is facing a 35% tariff as of today instead of the 25% tariff that had been in effect since early March. Again, this is the so-called fentanyl tariff. There are also the sector-specific tariffs that are still in effect on autos, steel, aluminum, lumber, and copper now in some cases as well. So overall, though, Canada, I don't think much changes overnight here, because there are estimates that over 90% of our exports to the U.S. could be CUSMA or USMCA compliant, and so it's really only a small portion. Sure, the headline says that the tariff rate increased from 25 to 35% here from yesterday to today, but it's only on a small portion of things made in Canada, and some of that includes things coming out of our agri-food industry if there's imported ingredients that doesn't qualify for the CUSMA exemption.
Shaun, one of the things I think in listening to what's coming out of the White House in the last little while, I don't get the sense that the same sort of friendly terms between the President of the U.S. and the Prime Minister of Canada exist necessarily. What's your gauge on relationship management between the two countries right now?
So I want to weave in Mexico into this in the sense that I think it's been speculated or thought of that President Sheinbaum of Mexico is kind of like the Trump whisperer. She has played this game very correctly. Mexico, of course, got the 90-day extension. But I think after further looking at it, Canada's relationship with the White House is significantly better today than it was under Prime Minister Trudeau. I think we can all agree on that. The question is Canada in any different spot than Mexico really at this point? And, after really looking at it here this morning, I'm not sure they are. I think Canada and Mexico are really in the same spot. I think Canada seems to be a little bit more of the more popular kicking toy, where there seems to be some desire by the White House to, at least on the surface, treat Mexico a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, they're really not. Canada and Mexico are different than the rest of the pool. They are different than Australia. They're different than the UK, the EU, even China. This is playing a serious game with the U.S. economy, and I think cooler heads are going to prevail. At the end of the day, I was in the U.S. all week. I was at a conference in Scottsdale, and people look at all these other trade deals a little bit differently. Like, it's sort of there is I talk to Democrats and Republicans, and it's just like, let's figure this out. And it sort of reminds me a little bit at family dinner, as we're going to get together on August long weekend. We're going to barbecue, and Grandpa's kind of going on about how things used to be better and they used to be different. And Canada's kind of like, they just sort of politely pass the ribs and the mashed potatoes and just hope all this blows over by dessert. And that's kind of, I think, where we are. I think we're going to find a solution, and I'm hoping it happens in very short order.
Mm-hmm. Markets, of course, were not super happy today with all these new tariffs or new tariff talk, etc. We'll see what's the over-under on these being perhaps walked back by early next week. We will have to keep track and see what happens. Evan, I want to ask
Lyndsey,
you.
Lyndsey, one point. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut in. Just remember what happened when Trump walked away and said, no more negotiations with Canada. That was on a Friday. By Sunday, Canada said, no digital tax anymore. We're getting rid of it. And also, we're back at the table on Monday. Maybe we see a repeat performance of that here over this weekend.
So what would be that thing, though? Would that be the access to supply management they should actually have? Would it be? What would it be? Right? Yeah, Evan, you're saying no. So what do you think? What does Canada have to walk back to say, oops, sorry, come on back?
I'm not sure I 100% think they have anything right now to walk back, to be fair. And again, I'm with Shaun. I'm looking at the clock, and it's whatever time it is, and you tell me what's going to happen in the next 24, 48, 72 hours. Who knows? The big one for me is, again, as Kelvin mentioned, yes, the 10% extra, but anything under CUSMA didn't adjust. So did we wake up today and everything is gone backwards? No. In my eyes, it's a small glitch. And I think in the end, it's posturing and fear mongering, or whatever you want to call it. And as you said, the relationship, we've heard it. I mean, he said it definitely sounds a little more conflicted with Canada than Mexico right now. But at the same time, he's also in a negotiation. So they're not going to be best friends until we see this thing through. So from my standpoint, is nothing's really changed overnight. And by Monday or Tuesday, as Shaun said, I think we're just going to be back to the same spot we are today.
We talked to Jacob Shapiro from Bespoke Group earlier this week for a Frontlines episode. And, Jacob kind of put it this way. All of this makes much more sense if you think about this through the lens of a reality show. And there are chapters, there are episodes, there are elements of drama throughout to drag the audience in. And at the end of the day, I do believe that there is going to be a deal, because and maybe I'm being naive, and I could be proven to be so. I have confidence that Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, understands how important the Canada and Mexico supply chain is to the U.S. economy, and vice versa, and cooler heads are going to prevail.
Kelvin, that if we think about this as, and I really like how Jacob sort of phrased that of like, it's a reality show. It's all about, the pomp and circumstance and the drama and et cetera. But I find like that's terrifying to me. And these are real numbers, real economies, real people behind all this. So how do industries actually navigate if we're supposed to treat it like a reality show?
You try to stay out of the camera, out of the spotlight, I think is the best way to do it. And I'm not sure there is so much of this is on the president's whim based on his emotions. There's no details. There's no enforceability to a lot of these framework deals that have been announced over the last couple of weeks. And so even if you have a deal in place, I'm not sure that the uncertainty has been lessened for some of these countries, because if all of a sudden, say, something comes up where it draws Trump's ire, there's no mechanism for a formal dispute process in these agreements. And so I don't know. I'm not sure that there's a lot of good answers right now, Lyndsey, to that question. I think everybody is tired of the chaos. They'd like it to end, and it's got to come either from, well, probably ultimately from the U.S. markets. Markets will have to draw some guardrails on these policies and this chaotic atmosphere.
Yeah, think what backed them off the liberation tariffs back in April and the implementation of them, and why there was a pause, was because the bond market said this is nuts. And you know, that's where Scott Bessent comes in, right? That this is where the Jamie Dimons of the world come in. This is where those people of that substance and that, you know, they carry weight in at Wall Street and in Washington D.C. and that's really what probably backs this thing back, especially on the USMCA. Like, we were chatting last night about like a 15% blanket tariff on even USMCA goods. That's nuts and bonkers and different than a Japan or a UK 50% blanket tariff. It would cause significant damage to all three economies of inside the USMCA.
Mm-hmm. And we got to somewhat remember he has a mandate of X amount of tariffs and X amount of policies that he wanted coming through in 90 or whatever it was. So he's still trying to posture to get that there, right? And he's got to make deals in order to complete that mandate.
What sucks for Canada is the IEPA, you know, the IEPA appeal court they're dealing with those IEPA tariffs right now. The hearings did not go very well for the president this week. The speculation is that the appeal court is going to rule against the president's use of those tariffs, but then it's still going to go to the Supreme Court. So you're looking at like 2026. And so that doesn't get Canada out of this mess on these fentanyl tariffs anytime soon.
I'm still a little like, really, we're going to cage this as a fentanyl thing. But they have to, right?
There's a reason for it. Yeah.
I know there's a reason for it, but I mean, it's a farce. Also, I just wanted to throw, this is a complete out of left field, but I saw today that, do you know that George Jetson of the Jetsons was said to be born in 2022? So now, yes. So imagine right now that thinking about looking forward of what the world may look like, George Jetson apparently would be 3 years old right now.
We're getting closer with all these ChatGPT agents.
I know, but I'm still waiting for my Rosie, for my robot to clean my house. Still waiting. Anyway,
I'm not going to say how much you just aged yourself with that metaphor. Just so you know,
Evan has no idea who the Jetsons are.
Just so you know,
none whatsoever.
Evan, she's old.
I am older.
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah, I am older than Shaun by 2 whole weeks. You guys. Okay, all right. We got to take a quick break. We'll be back with more of the Friday Issues Panel right here on RealAg Radio right after this.
I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other RealAg personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. From nutrient management to the latest weather, market, and ag trends, the Dirt, an economics podcast, is your place for farm-smart topics to boost your profitability. Join Mike Howell on Season 4 of the Dirt podcast, available now at nutrient-economics.com. All right, we're bringing in the Friday Issues Panel, Shaun Haney, Kelvin Heppner, Evan Shout, here on this Friday, August 1st. It is the first day of the new crop year, so we are into 2526, if you will. I'm going to start with Mr. Haney. We've got some hot off the press, not that Evan knows what that means, some numbers from the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index, the CFSI. From now on, Evan is nothing but a 12-year-old. So there you go. But we've got some CFSI numbers that we can start to delve into. Looking forward to seeing all of them. But what do we got at high level?
Yeah, I'll hit on those in a second. But, during the commercial break, Lyndsey, I didn't realize, we were talking about our favorite TV shows. You mentioned, My Three Sons, Mr.
Oh, my gosh.
Ed.
Just shut your mouth.
Bewitched? I didn't know you were such a Bewitched fan.
Okay. Sabrina the Teenage Witch, maybe. Not Bewitched. Come on now.
Okay.
I was born the same year as you, sir. Okay, carrying on.
So we got the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index, and really appreciate all of the farmers across the country that participate in these quarterly surveys. It's really critical information to get a really good understanding of what's going through the farmer's mind at this time. And if you look at the July numbers, and we're going to have a full breakdown of this next week, but if you look at the July numbers, they're actually not that changed from the April numbers. And we're looking at a 62 out of 200 on the current farm financial performance, and we're looking at a 72 on future farm financial performance. So pretty close to being equal in terms of how farmers feel about, relatively speaking, about their financial performance today versus 12 months ago, and today versus 12 months from now. And when you look in the livestock numbers versus the crop numbers, you're going to see some differences. So this is the aggregate. Crop farming right now, although there are some better yields out there than we probably thought maybe 6 weeks ago, profitability is still, it's evading us, I think is a good way to maybe put it.
Mm-hmm. Evan, does that ring true with the clients you're working with as far as some of the outlook, or do you deal with absolute optimists and everything is great?
You tell me, did it rain on Monday or not?
Well, there's that. Yeah.
I like to say that the sentiment index is literally here based on a day by day, because if it rains, I get to do combine quotes. And if it doesn't rain, then the sky's falling and we're in for another bad year. But from what I'm hearing from clients right now, it probably too little too late on some of the cereals and other early grains, which obviously we were a little bit early, I think, in Western Canada, especially. I'm not sure about the East, but so what I'm hearing is that canola might have had a little bit of upkick from the late rains we've had, but the cereals are still not looking good. So we're probably looking at below average yields on an average across Western Canada. And again, that's from my client base, so take it with the grain of salt that you want. But and I'd agree with Shaun, is the profitability metrics and what guys are looking at from financial performance. We're probably not far off where we were last year. I mean, average crops, still areas of drought. Some areas are going to have great crops, just depending on if you got the rains and at what times. Mm-hmm. But we are, if anything, what I'm hearing is there's going to be some headaches because some of the late rains probably had regrowth and a little bit of more nightmare than it is an actual help.
And an interesting tidbit here I heard on the Farmer Rapid Fire this week is, and again, everyone's going to be different, but a couple anecdotes that I heard was later seeded crop better than the early seeded crop because it got more of the moisture. It's a little earlier in its development, and we haven't had the punishing heat on the prairies that is really, during that, especially during that flowering time, that can really, provide some of that heat blast and the canola and things like that. So I feel like there's a little bit more optimistic to the crop that got in later than earlier, which is totally flipped to what it normally would be.
It can be.
And a little bit of smoke coverage as well, right? Like we complain about the forest fires, but to be fair, when canola's blooming, most guys don't mind it at all. So, again, do I think it's going to be those rains give us above average crop and we should be optimistic we're going to have huge years? No. I still think across Western Canada, we're still looking at average to below average right now.
Mm-hmm. Now, Kelvin, you're in a bit of a different spot, of course, more corn, more soybeans, those later maturing crops. Let's face it, soybeans need moisture in August to really actually come through. What's the sentiment where you are?
I'd say in this pocket of southern Manitoba down into the North Dakota area, crops look there's some areas with dry bias, especially on the northern growing edge of the growing region. But here in the Red River Valley, we're below normal in terms of average moisture, but we've had a fair amount lately, and crops look really strong right now. There's some I'd say some good feelings of optimism, not so much on the market side of things, but in terms of yield and production potential still at this point.
I probably should have gave you that disclaimer, as I was not talking about Manitoba, because they always get rain and they're always in the beautiful, beautiful spot for crops.
Well, that's what I always say about Southwestern Ontario, but we do have some dry spots there this year, which is increasing concern. We've got also. We heard yesterday on the Farmer Rapid Fire, tar spot infection looks to be lower than last year. That's definitely a positive. But a lot of questions around the tassel wrap. Bigger issue in the Midwest, but it is being seen in Southwestern Ontario, and we really don't know how entirely that's going to impact some of the pollination.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, we have to though, Shaun. We need to stop looking at tassels and start looking at silks. Anyway, Evan, go ahead.
I was going to say on the future financial performance, I think guys are still looking at fertilizer prices for next year right now. And I mean, they're still 800 plus for urea. And I mean, for most guys, that's not a productive number that they like. So I think that's the biggest discussions I'm having these days is who's buying and who's not and what looks like a profitable. I mean, when canola looked at $16 for next fall and you could close the hedge, it might have looked good, but we're not in those days anymore. And right now, fertilizer prices do not look pretty for next year.
Yeah, and when it comes to making those farm investments, we're seeing confidence in making farm investments right now, 55 at a 200. We're still in that same band in those, between 50 and 60. Now, does that mean people aren't making those investments? No, but they don't necessarily feel it's a great time to be, but they may have to suck it up if they need to put up some more bin storage or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So there's two places I want to take this, but we probably only have time for one before we need to take a break. So let's start at the one that everybody wants to talk about, which of course, yes, profitability is that mix of not just crop price and yield, et cetera, but it is your costs. Evan, some interesting findings out there on the landscape when we talk about used equipment prices. We're also going to talk land price discussions, but let's do that in the next segment because I think we have a lot to say. But certainly on the used equipment side, what are the conversations right now? What are the auctions looking like? What's the trend there?
I think we're starting to see that we're tracking where the U.S. tracked, let's call it 12 months ago. So we're probably a year to 2 years behind the U.S. market on some of these drops, but I think based on the last two Ritchie sales we've seen, there's some considerable deals to be made out there. And to be fair, most of the producers I work with are probably looking those 1 to 2 year old machines right now because of that gap that's been built between the new price versus the used price. And I would say as we go into this fall, I still think we got room to move. And in my eyes, I wouldn't be buying anything right now. I think post harvest, we're going to see some significant drops still in the used market.
Kelvin, from your perspective where you are, what is the general sentiment as far as things like equipment purchases or making those investments in the farm? Same idea of, perhaps it's a wait and see approach, that there might be some deals to be had?
Yeah, I think there's again, this ties in with the tariff discussion as well. I know I've noticed on some of the invoices for equipment expenses here at our farm, there's starting to be a line on it for tariffs, and maybe we haven't made any major giant purchases where that's affected it, but that is part of the decision formula right now, and of course where interest rates are headed, whether we could see further cuts there. I think that always factors into the timing and how farmers respond to this too. It doesn't mean that now is a bad time to invest, but maybe 12 months down the road looks like it might be a better time to invest, and so I think that is reflected in those questions, in the responses to that question as well.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing we're seeing is some of the dealers and the manufacturers are starting to offer some pretty good interest deals just to move some of the used equipment. Because I think if you drive by a lot today, you're starting to see a lot of equipment start piling up. And I think you're going to see probably some deals, as Kelvin said, on the financing side in order to move some of that equipment off the lots.
Yeah, it's the battle of who's going to be left with the worst balance sheet. Right?
Right.
The OEM trying to move it off their sheet onto the dealer, and the dealer trying to get it off their lot and move it to the farmer.
Mm-hmm. I have a baler that is exactly that. So if anybody's looking for one, come and get mine. Because that's every once in a while in September, you get those phone calls of the dealer trying to move some of that stuff off the lot, right? So maybe wait around. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more of the Issues Panel here on RealAg Radio on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM.
Built on over 100 years of seed innovation and unwavering commitment to farmers, Pioneer 100 Series canola hybrids deliver a step change in yield performance and agronomic traits. This isn't just better canola, it's different canola. Pioneer 100 Series. Contact your local Pioneer sales representative or visit pioneer.com/100 series to learn more today.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Friday and the Issues Panel, and this segment brought to you by FP Genetics. FP Genetics brings new seed genetics to Canadian farms, empowering growers to thrive in ever-changing conditions. Visit fpgenetics.ca and join thousands of Canadian growers who trust FP Genetics to deliver innovative, reliable, hybrid fall rye seed genetics season after season. Experience the next wave. Bringing in our issues panel for our last segment, Shaun, Haney, Kelvin, Heppner, and Evan Shout. All right, let's pick up where everybody always wants to talk, and that is land prices, of course. Evan, you have strong feelings about your own guests on your own podcast and their opinions of land prices. Catch us up. What do we need to talk about?
I wouldn't say strong feelings. I just say we have a difference of opinion, and we're allowed to have those differences.
We are.
That's why I have the podcast. To be fair, guys, is we get to have those discussions. But no, I think a couple articles that have gone out through the Western Producer and a few other areas have sparked some interest. I know some emotion for sure in producers when you start talking land, and a lot of it's based around the data analysis and historical probabilities. And nothing against it. There's merit to everything. I mean, it works in the commodity markets. Does it work on a hard asset like land? That's probably where I have my discussions back and forth. For me, I mean, everything we've seen as of late, again this year, I mean, the last land sale we watched was 20% higher than the going rate that we thought it was going to go for. So are we seeing those blips that everybody's kind of predicting? And then to be fair, there was no deadline or timeline on this. But right now, I think we're in a different industry than we were 10, 20, 30 years ago. The producers are bigger. The producers are more complex. The debt mechanisms we have are considerably more attractive for long-term purchases. I mean, you can lock in rates longer term, longer amortization periods. It's just, we are not playing the same game. If we were playing chess 10 years ago, we're playing checkers today, or vice versa.
Was it Trent Clarenbach? Is that?
Yeah. So yeah. I had Trent on the podcast, and he's done a whole bunch of research on the historicals and trying to figure out where the cycles are going to go on land. And I mean, the actuarial information sound, it's just, I don't think we're dealing with the same sample size. You know, the sample that we're using is different today.
What's he predicting?
Well, 62% drop in land prices back to 1,200. And I mean, do I believe that can happen? No. Now, could I be wrong in 10 years? Maybe. But from my standpoint, nothing I'm seeing and nothing from the wealth and the equity in producers today, would I believe that blip is even there. Could things soften? Yes. Are we going to see a massive drop? No, because I think it would take an industry and throw it upside down.
Shaun, your thoughts?
I totally disagree. So I agree with Evan. I disagree with Trent.
I was going to say, this got really
exciting.
Sorry. Okay.
This is the second time today I've had on a radio show. I had to clarify my thought.
Your disagreement. Okay.
Yeah. So, no. Could we see a minor correction? Like we have the slump that's happening right now in the used equipment. That is different than land. Land is really the backstop for the entire industry. We've seen the Canadian farmland. I've always felt it a little less responsive to some of the economics in comparison to, say, some of the land prices in like Iowa or Illinois. I think there's a lot of people questioning some of the thoughts that he has had on this. I personally do not believe it. It would require an immense amount of volume to hit the market at one time. And the sellers panicking that we were headed in that direction. I just think we're skipping steps. There is a lot that has to happen between now and something like a 60% drop in land prices. And I will tell you this, if there was a 60% drop in land prices, the whole industry is upside down bankrupt.
Mm-hmm. Kelvin, your thoughts on what it would take, for an actual, like that to me would be like an actual tanking of land prices. Corrections are one thing, a slowdown in a market is one thing, lower growth or maybe no growth. But Kelvin, what are your thoughts on what it would actually mean for land prices to really, for the bottom to fall out of it?
Shaun talked about it from the supply side with land coming on the market. I think on the demand side, we'd also have to have farmers running out of financing options, or the demand, whoever was buying land would have to, and Evan talked about all the different debt mechanisms that there are out there now, and farmers are in many cases are sitting on equity that they can still invest in land. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have seen these land sales so resilient despite lower profitability or negative profitability in some regions, that type of thing. So to me, this is a classic case of technical versus fundamental analysis. And technical, sure, it works in highly liquid, fast trading markets. I'm not sure it applies as well over a large time frame when lots of variables change over that time frame. And I think that's the case when you look at the land market.
Now, I'll say this, though. This is like a little bit of a be careful what you wish for in terms of if farmer demand for land does soften because of extended profitability concerns in the cropping sector, okay? This is where the demand from hedge funds, family offices, very wealthy people outside the industry, this is where that demand can supplement some of the farmer demand that maybe is weakened over a period of time to hold those land prices higher. So everybody that's like, oh, we want all these people out of the market. We only want farmers to be able to buy land.
No, you don't.
I don't know.
Evan, so that was my question to you, Evan, is that like because you mentioned off the hop, land prices are not purely an agricultural play, right?
No,
and so the market doesn't act like a purely agricultural market.
No, and I think a lot of farmers and producers are starting to realize that is that they're not just farms, they're actually real estate holders, and you can make money off real estate without being a farmer. And I think that's the big sentiment there, is that everybody wants to go back to the 80s, and they said, oh, it happened then, it can happen now. And that's honestly, talking to Trent, that was the biggest emotional tie, was that anybody over the age of 65 was emotionally, yeah, you are correct. We've seen it. We saw the interest rates. We saw the drop. Anybody under that age that didn't go through that, they actually were annoyed that the article came out. There was emotions coming with it. And I think the big one for me is, like you said, it's different now. We have equity, we have wealth, we have hedge funds, and you are correct. I do believe access to capital is one of the biggest risks on farms. And I think if a whole bunch of land does come available, that's going to be the determining factor. But we also have to remember it's not just farmers anymore. Mm-hmm. And there is family offices, there is hedge funds. I mean, as producers, we like to say we don't want equity, as Shaun said, in the industry. We want to keep it out. I don't believe that's going to be possible going forward with the size of the consolidation that's happening and what's going to happen in the next 10 years. We're going to need those individuals because access to capital, strictly from a banking perspective, is not enough for the amount of 65-year-old farmers versus the amount of 40-year-old farmers we have today.
Mm-hmm. I'll put it in perspective this way. We're more likely to see the Leafs win the cup.
Oh, God.
Than land prices to go down.
Oh, cut that. That is, cut that.
There
10 years
go.
from now. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Kelvin, are you okay? How you doing over there?
Oh, I agree totally. And this is not we're not setting up much conflict here for the audience to enjoy the conflict between Shaun and me on this one, because the Leafs are in the cup before land prices drop 60%. But, one factor that I guess could also affect this is restrictions on who can buy land or who can invest in land or that type of thing. And we do know that some provinces have more strict rules on that than other provinces. And that might be a factor in why land values are where they are today. But I don't think there's any political appetite or major push right now to really make big changes there where it would lead to that kind of collapse in land values as well.
And an interesting question for you, Kelvin. If we did come into a circumstance where supply and demand flip-flopped and we were seeing that, how long do you think it takes for them to change that policy to get money back into agriculture? Because as we said, the whole industry would be bankrupt. So
exactly. It would happen as fast as politically possible.
100%.
Yeah. It's a different. So Evan, you noted something interesting, and hearkening back to, obviously having lived through the dirty 30s and the 80s, which I did apparently. But I do think there is an emotional baggage holdover to if you think about people who lived through the Depression, if that impacted the rest of their lives and business decisions and how they lived the rest of their lives. I think for many who lived through the early 80s and the 20% interest rates and all those things, that will forever color how they approach a lot of these things. But we are now far enough away that it is a different world. It's a different set of variables.
Well, and I think we saw it because we saw that consolidation over coming out of the 80s, it didn't happen fast. It happened slow because they'd felt the pain and they were nervous. And then all of a sudden the next generation started coming in and they hadn't felt the pain. They hadn't seen the 18% interest and consolidation took off. That's why I still believe going the next 10 years, we are going to see a mass consolidation, just like the industry has. I mean, we're seeing the Bunge, Viterra, we're seeing all that stuff. The producer side is going to do that probably at a 10x rate. Now, you are correct. It's a different dynamic now. Yeah. And I think going forward, that's what's going to drive the land prices is that we do have individuals who haven't seen those interest rates. And as I said before, a lot of guys have their rates locked in. I mean, you can lock them in for a decade or more now. So the interest rate risk that the 80s has kind of left in the back of everybody's head, for a lot of guys, it's not there anymore. Mm-hmm. There is minimal risk. And
for the farmers that have been not buying land and have been less aggressive since 1995 or 2000, have Evan, when we were at Crop Production Show last year, we talked about this. They've missed out on a massive wealth creation period due to the escalation of land. And some of those people, they're in the group of, well, it's going to crash, can't go any higher. Remember the 80s. And so, I've heard from some of the audience on Evan's interview, and it tends to be coming from the people that want to see the last 10 years, 15 years of land acquisition as a bad decision. See, I told you so. I knew it was going back. And I don't know. I don't like that kind of mentality either.
Mm-hmm. Just because we want something bad enough to be true doesn't mean it will be, like the Leafs winning the cup. Right, Kelvin?
Poor Kelvin.
Poor Kelvin.
I love it how we keep coming back to that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it lives in my head rent free. Okay, there are two topics we have not got to. And so, spoiler alert, we will get to them in the bonus segment. Because Evan Shout desperately wants to talk about supply management and doing away with it. And so that's not controversial at all. And I may be putting words in.
Wow, my social just
blew up. But the other is, of course, the Canola Council of Canada announcing this week that they were axing essentially all of their field agronomic staff. And so that is a big one. So for all of you who have the podcast download, stick around for the bonus segment. For all of you listening, of course, on Rural Radio, Channel 147, thank you so much for joining us here on the show. You can head on over to your favorite platform to find the podcast version if you'd like. But Shaun, Evan, Kelvin, have a wonderful weekend, a long weekend. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Yep. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. We will be back next week with your favorite episodes. So check that out. The RealAg team is going to take some much needed time off, but don't worry. There'll still be a show every Monday through Friday, 4:30 Eastern. Cheers, everybody. Welcome to the bonus segment, everybody, where we can say things like damn. Anyway, there you go. Okay, I am Lyndsey Smith. I'm joined now by Shaun Haney. You may know him from RealAg Radio. Evan Shout from the Truth About Ag podcast and Maverick Ag. And Kelvin Heppner. He's our resident supply management farmer. And that is where we're going to start. Evan, what would happen, do you think, on the landscape? We just talked about land prices. We talked about how different that is. I would think, as everyone is so afraid of, that if ever we got rid of supply management, that would also have a gigantic impact on the balance sheets of many Canadian farmers. What say you?
I don't know how you do it, Lyndsey, to be open. First of all, you're trying to pull me down a hole that I really am not following. But
darn it, I tried.
But I can give you my aspect is if they ever did decide to go down that route, it's just not possible. I mean, the leverage on quota today versus the leverage on land is almost identical, if not worse. Mm-hmm. So that piece of paper has literally held up a whole bunch of farms across Canada, whether in purchasing land, purchasing equipment, operations, more quota. It would be $1 trillion, and that's probably low deficit for the government to actually buy out that quota without turning those farms upside down and bankrupt. So, I mean, is it even possible? And we like to talk about getting rid of it because of the tariff discussions and everything else. I don't believe it's actually even a possibility, even once we start talking.
Mm-hmm. Shaun, this is one of those things that I think often gets in this whole tariff dynamic gets misrepresented on both sides. But one of the key things that I think the U.S. has tried to make very clear to Canada is just meet the demands set out and agreed to in the USMCA deal. And if those were met, perhaps it wouldn't be such a sticking point with President Trump. Well,
meet the definition of the TRQ allocations to the U.S. interpretation of the text. Canada has a opposing opinion of the definition of that, and they feel they are following to the letter of the agreement. I think this is a much more of a discussion internally in Canada. And people that are against supply management are using what the Trump administration is trying to do in the trade negotiation as leverage to try to forge this discussion ahead. I have said repeatedly on this show, when you talk to U.S. dairy groups, they are not trying to bring down supply management. They are looking for, again, use the U.S.-Japan trade deal as an indication on rice. Mm-hmm. The amount of market access did not increase. What changed is how that TRQ is allocated, and in this case, more U.S. rice is going to be purchased as a part of that 770,000 metric tons of rice that Japan is importing. And I think that's a little bit of a model here for what Canada can expect in these talks. I don't believe that, even if you hear reports, I think sometimes Canada takes things President Trump says way too literally, and we have these like hissy fit running around chicken with their heads cut off and just realize it's putting something on the board and it's always out of reach and looking for something that is a little bit more reasonable at the end of the day. I believe that's actually what they're searching on dairy, not tearing down the pillars of supply management.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of chickens and chicken farmers, Kelvin, why do egg producers and chicken producers flutter under the radar on so much of this discussion, do you think?
It's a good question. I guess the size of the industry it's a smaller industry than dairy, and I think a large part of it comes down to U.S. dairy groups wanting access into the Canadian market and being more vocal than the U.S. poultry groups about wanting access into the Canadian market. We do already under CUSMA, under the trade deals that we have in place. For example, our farm, we produce hatching eggs, and I believe it's 18% right now of our hatching eggs in Canada are supposed to come from the U.S. every year. So we do already. We are steady, reliable customers of those U.S. eggs when they are available, which has been an issue the last number of years. With the shortage and avian influenza and everything else. So, speaking as somebody involved in the poultry industry, we don't mind flying under the radar, to be completely frank, when it comes to some of these discussions. I think part of the problem here is that President Trump doesn't get into the nuance in his Truth Social posts and tweets either. He talks about, again this week, talking about how Canada is not treating U.S. dairy farmers well with their 200-400% tariffs, or I forget what number he used this time. But he doesn't get into the nuance of the TRQ discussion. He just uses the headline issue, and that's, like Shaun said, that's what Canadian opponents to the system run with in their argument over the last number of weeks in the op-eds that we're seeing.
It does make a great soundbite, doesn't it, for the reality show that is the Trump administration right now? Like, it does.
Well, I think it's also... Lyndsey, it's also important to remember the U.S. has its own versions of this. It's called sugar. Mm-hmm. So, I think, again, we get trapped in this Canadian bubble where people seem to think that we're the only ones that have these like sort of sacred cows or, protectionist bubbles around certain pieces of production. Other countries do too. Japan, it's rice. The U.S., it's sugar. Like the UK, it's beef. It's okay.
And look at every one of these framework deals that the Trump administration is announcing. They're picking winners and losers all over the place when it comes to Boeing or when it comes to certain companies that are part of it. It's managed trade. It's not free trade. And so like you say, Shaun, here in Canada, we often tend to be idealistic? I'm not sure what the right way of describing it is, but we tend to hold ourselves to this gold standard. Meanwhile, other countries are playing the law of the jungle kind of thing.
Well, yeah. I think we're a significantly more divided industry in Canada than we are in other areas. So what I mean by that is we get the throwing, whatever you want to call it, back and forth. Well, we don't talk about the grain production subsidies that guys have on crop insurance and everything else. And the U.S. doesn't talk about the massive amount of subsidies they throw at their grain production as well. So, I mean, we're looking at supply and manage because it's a fancy term and it's a buzzword and everybody likes to throw it under the bus. I'm sorry, guys, there's subsidies across the entire industry and we got to be very clear on that. So it may not work the same as the system in dairy and poultry, but in the end, we're also getting a check from the government in certain ways or cost savings. So let's be very clear. We as an industry got to come together instead of essentially doing what we're doing right now, which is segregating and making us weaker at every level of government and of trade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you think U.S. dairy is somehow some sort of magical, ideological utopia of no support, you I don't know what metaphor to come up with. I got some ice to sell you from an Eskimo or whatever that phrase is, because on dairy, if you look around the world, you either take care of it on the front end or the back end. Canada takes care on the front end. The U.S., for example, takes care on the back end with margin price protection programs and things like that. So we need to stop. We need to kind of open our eyes a little bit to what's actually happening around the world when it comes to farm support programs and what we're doing or not doing in comparison.
Mm-hmm. All right. We're going to leave it there for a moment because I do really want to talk about the big news this week. Perhaps not a complete surprise to some, but still, I think, a pretty major move by the Canola Council of Canada, axing their agronomic field staff. Evan has just lost power, but it's okay. You'll come back. Okay, restart that computer. Okay,
that was hilarious.
Yeah, Kelvin, I'm gonna start with you. So you of course broke this story, spoke with President Chris Davison this week as well. I think we've all got plenty of feedback from people out on the landscape, both positive, both negative. But catch us up. This Canola Council is positioning this as a key part of a new strategic vision.
Yeah, they unveiled a new 5-year plan yesterday, and the day before, on Wednesday, the council's agronomy specialists, many of whom we've interviewed over the years on the Canola School episodes, on our Agronomy Monday shows here on RealAg Radio, they were all informed the day before, so on Wednesday, that they had been terminated effective immediately. I believe there's 1 or 2 agronomic roles left now at the Canola Council. So first of all, I would say some of these people I would consider friends, and it's always tough, or this is a tough situation for them, so our thoughts are with them. This is something, though, that has been, you can kind of see it on the writing on the wall for a number of years. It goes back almost a decade, that there's been pressure from some of the Canola Council members. So the Canola Council brings together producer organizations, industry groups, so that's grain companies, processors, and then also the life science companies, so the seed and crop input companies, chemical companies. And so the grain companies in particular for a long time have been calling for a focus on support, cutting the budgets, not so much focus on market development and agronomy. And so back in 2017-18 timeframe, we saw Richardson International, Canada's largest, or one of the largest grain handlers at the time, extract itself, leave the Canola Council. And so this has been a fairly long time coming in terms of pressure, internal pressure on the agronomy work that the Canola Council does. And it kind of came to a head this week with their agronomy specialists being let go. And yeah, people can find more of the interview, like you said, with Council President Chris Davison up on RealAg. So lots of background to it.
Shaun, what have you been hearing from the audience? I know certainly for me, those in support saying it wasn't maybe the most efficient way to deliver agronomic services. Others saying, this is a big loss of a lot of brain power and a lot of things that were really beneficial for prairie producers. What are you hearing?
Yeah, kind of a mixed bag. And you start to understand where people are coming from. We had already seen an exodus of some of what I would consider kind of the lead agronomic people at Canola Council moving to private industry. that transition has been happening over the last number of years, and obviously, there is demand for agronomists. So, this is a change, but I would be confident in saying these agronomists that have been let go are going to end up in private industry somewhere. It almost, I think of this is a solution fixing an old problem. And and what I mean by that is the solution of having this agronomic institution at the Canola Council. I think time has moved on. We've learned more about growing canola. We still have things to learn, and there's still research to be done. But I think that there is a lot of this void has been filled by private industry, and so it allows for this actually to take place. We've seen significant investments by BSF is an example where they've committed a lot to agronomic research, and really led the charge on the fact, hey, we can seed canola deeper than we previously thought. It's just like an example. I don't think this is really a surprise. If you are uncomfortable with change and you really like the idea of that independence of the Canola Council agronomists, then you're probably feeling, disappointed, betrayed. You've got probably some stronger feelings than others that see where there is some other solution still available.
Evan, what are you hearing from, you're based in Saskatchewan. I know certainly from some of the people involved in the canola industry in Saskatchewan, they're very on side with this. They think it's a good move. It does change the dynamic, though, of the agronomic advice on the canola crop. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think I'm a little bit with Kelvin on I feel bad. I mean, obviously when anybody loses their job and has to move into a different spot in the industry, but at the same time, the writing was on the wall. I mean, you can't take blood from a stone, let's be fair. And then the checkoff dues have been dropping. I mean, they needed places to watch their spending and their budgetary constraints. And as you said, the members, such as Saskatchewan, have been pushing very hard for change. And for me, it doesn't affect most of the producers I work with, because to be fair, third-party agronomy is one of those areas where most of my guys have gone private. So a lot of guys weren't using that service line as well. And I mean, the retails offer it. And again, a lot of my guys don't use those because obviously being sold the same product as you have an agronomist isn't the best way to manage that risk. But for me, as the industry consolidates, as we get more and more larger scale farms, and by larger, I don't mean the mass consolidation. I mean, even 5,000 to 10,000 acre farms, they're hiring those third-party agronomists or they're hiring on staff. So I don't see it being a massive issue for the producers that I'm working with, at least. For some of the industry, yes, they probably had utilization of them. But to be fair, I think it's just another change in the industry. And the worst phrase in agriculture is because it's always been that way, right?
Yeah. Great training ground. Like there's some really good agronomists that have come out of that program. I also think it's a bit of a shot across the bow. And if with the profit that is in canola, historically, if canola can't support this kind of agronomy network, can other crops? I would kind of doubt that. And I think just like we've seen a real, we're hearing about government cutbacks in terms of AFC going forward in the next budget, and that 50% top line reduction. Also, you look at some of the companies and some of the austerity that has happened there with some of their budgets. The grower groups and the national organizations are going through the same thing, and that cost cutting brings some tough decisions, and it impacts people. And I think that's the part that is the most unfortunate out of all of this, like you guys have already said.
Yeah, for sure.
The other side I'd look at is, I mean, I'm all for entrepreneurism. I mean, that's what we push most of our producers to do. I'm going to look at it from an opportunity standpoint, as agronomy is one of those services that is not going away from the farm from that level, because I think there's less and less agronomists out there, and we're going to have generational transfers and that same succession that farms have through the agronomy networks. I see it as an opportunity for a lot of these individuals to build their own businesses, go out there. The need is still there. The need hasn't gone away. It's just not going to be publicly funded. It's going to be privately funded, and you're going to do it yourself.
Well, and one of the things here too is if the difference between extension and communicating the research and the best practices to the grower, and somebody actually doing the research, and that is the maybe the void that is less is there's not as many players to pick up on that, right?
Yeah. Kelvin, go ahead.
But extension, sure, it is still done in church basements and community halls and stuff like that. There's some of that, but a lot of it is moving onto YouTube, or now I think we're starting to see the potential of ChatGPT and AI models and that type of thing for a lot of the basic communications information can be conveyed in new ways, in different ways. And so the role of the agronomist might shift more to the discovery type of role in terms of figuring out, like being at that cutting edge research, especially as Evan talks about with farms, the last 50% of farmers with, but it might be to be at the front edge, that 5 to 10% of farmers in terms of trying new things and work on that type of thing. And I'm curious with all these things coming together, with cuts like this, with AFC likely reducing its staff size, there's going to be a lot of agronomic brain power out there, and what the opportunity is with that brain power in the coming years for our industry.
And we got to tie it across to technology a little bit too. I mean, a lot of agronomists nowadays, they're writing prescriptions. They're moving towards the data and tech side just as much as they're sticking with the agronomy side. So I think it's an underserviced line right now. As technology comes into the industry, there's an opportunity there still. I still believe there is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We cannot possibly know all the things. So even though, we've got, if you look at what the Canola Council has as like a knowledge base and, the years of video and articles and magazines and all those things that it has, you can mine that, but there will always be new, and it is the interpretation of that knowledge that really carries the value. And I mean, you're exactly right. There's still going to be a need for that, maybe an increased need for that, and combining that with technology for sure. All right, we're going to leave it there, even though Shaun looks like he has more to say. But frankly, this has been a very long bonus segment, Shaun. So you're out.
Yeah, we could go on forever.
We could, absolutely. All right. Thank you, Kelvin. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Shaun. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it very much. And thank you to all who have downloaded the RealAg Radio podcast. We really appreciate it. Send us your feedback, 1-855-776-6147, or drop me a line, lsmith@realagriculture.com. You can wish me a happy 65th birthday. Anyway, not actually. Okay. All right. Cheers, everybody. Have a great weekend. Take care.